us to love ourselves and love each other and love him. And we're going to be talking about that. The book was the second mountain. So the first mountain is all about being goal-oriented and achievement-oriented. And the second mountain is all about being soul-oriented and remembering that what matters is what's inside and not what's outside. So when we are truly our best selves, we understand that we need to place love and relationships above all other considerations and above all material accomplishments. Alrighty. So our first scripture verse is Deuteronomy 6:5. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Psalm 36:7 says, how priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. I love that image of a huge, big, gorgeous animal, and people are taking refuge in the shadow of the wings. So we're going to be talking about what comes obviously from the Sermon on the Mount. So there are a couple of different versions of it. One of them that I will be using is the Luke 10:27. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy soul and with all thy mind. And the second most important commandment is love thy neighbor as thyself. So the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary says, love is the divine attribute. It is the idea in the one mind that God is love and love is God. And so the one mind obviously is God. And so we all have the ability to attach ourselves to that one mind, to feel that one mind speaking to us. And that ability gives us the ability to love each other by loving God. So by establishing ourselves in the consciousness of divine love and expressing that love at all times, we are helped to fulfill the command, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despisingly use you. So Fillmore says, we develop love in our heart by asking daily that the infinite love of the Father be poured upon us, by praying, meditating, and affirming that we are one and express at all times the perfect love of God. So when our thoughts are established in love, a divine synchronization takes place. So remember we talked last week, I told you that there's a visual of this is your brain on God. So we're talking about vibration. We're talking about synchronizing ourselves with the mind of God. So God is outside us. God is inside us. God is inside our hearts. God is inside our brain. God is inside every cell of our body. So we're going to be talking about that. So we take place, the divine mind is fixed at a certain rate of vibration, and it's our job to come up to that level of vibration. So in order to tap the divine mind, we must bring this rate of vibration up, for it's only when our mind is vibrating at its most accelerated rate that God can make himself known to us. So in the silence, when his mind is fixed steadily on God and is functioning in the consciousness of infinite love, the activities of mind's brain cell synchronize with those of the very brain cell of the master. That's Charles Fillmore. All righty, so we're going to be talking a lot about love and what it is. I've got two people that I believe to be masters in love, and I'm going to be talking about their teachings today. And so, interestingly enough, both of them are Eastern thought leaders. All of you know who Thich Nhat is. I'm going to be talking about Thich Nhat today. He's a Buddhist monk, as you know. He was a Vietnamese monk, and he had a huge, big influence on Martin Luther King and the peace movement. He was a peace activist. So he wrote a book called How to Love. It's a short book. You can read it easily, and I highly recommend it. And I just pulled some information out of there that would be thoughtful for us to think about today. So he said, when our hearts are small, our understanding and compassion are limited, and we suffer. We can't accept or tolerate others and their shortcomings, and we demand that they change. But when our hearts expand, these same things don't bother us anymore. So he's talking about us. And what I'm going to be talking a lot about today is that we're the ones that have to change. So if we're going to love God and we're going to love people, we have to love ourselves, but we have to fix that hole inside of ourselves that we talk about all the time, so that we are 100% whole and complete. We're going to bring that 100% whole and complete person to the table when we're talking about being in relationship with someone. So when we feed and support our own happiness, we are nourishing our ability to love. So he talks about the fact that we've got to be happy, that we've got to be centered, that we've got to be calm. And when we nourish our spirits, and that's by meditating and praying and getting ourselves in alignment with the God of our understanding, when we do that, then we are able to bring love to someone else. So he says, understanding is love's other name. If you do not understand, you can't love. So a big part about being in relationship is understanding where the other person is coming from. And we're going to talk about that you can only really understand where another person is coming from if you make it a priority. And you got to make a priority to know where they are by listening to them carefully. So we're going to be talking about that. You have to listen to them to understand them so that you can love them better. You got to bring your best self to the table. So understanding is love's other name. Love is a living, breathing thing. If we start by being easy with ourselves, we will find it just there inside of us, solid and healing. So again, he's talking about the fact that we've got to be easy with ourselves. We've got to be at peace. When we come into a relationship, either loving God or loving other people outside us, it's got to be because we are centered and calm and we have love for ourselves too. So there are 4 elements. He says there are 4 elements of love: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So loving kindness is being able to offer kindness. He says, build a home within yourself by accepting yourself and learning to love and heal yourself. And then you will be able to offer loving kindness to others. The second one is compassion. He says, we have to understand another person's suffering, but we have to understand the suffering in ourselves too. Buddhists talk a lot about suffering. And so it's, for us in New Thought, it's not just about the suffering, but it's about understanding where a person is coming from. But you do have to understand where their pain is so that you can not step on their sore spots and that you can be gentle and loving and kind with them. And again, that all starts with being gentle and loving and kind with yourself. So that's compassion. He says joy. Joy is the capacity to offer joy. And then he talks a great deal about the fact that your presence is a gift. So your presence is bringing joy. So when we talk about bringing joy, we're not talking about bringing presents. We're talking about doing things, offering yourself, offering your whole and complete and total self, and that your presence itself is a gift. So that's joy. Equanimity. We're going to be talking about equanimity from both of these people. Equanimity he describes as inclusiveness, non-discrimination. There's no longer a boundary between you and the other person. Now, he's not talking about healthy boundaries, because in the rest of the book, he talks about you have to, protect your space and protect your heart, and you have to have healthy boundaries in order to have a healthy relationship. But what he's talking about here is the ability to feel another person's pain so that their pain becomes your pain, so that you can understand their suffering, so that you can love them wholeheartedly, so that you can be with them and help them to experience joy more by helping them when they're feeling despair to get rid of that. So you're sharing that experience with them and making it easier for them. So you are being loving and kind to them by sharing in their pain as well as their joy. So he also talks about it's extremely important to have respect and trust. So we're going to talk about trust next week. The title of next week's talk is The Sun Also Rises. And we're going to be talking a lot about trust. And we're going to be talking about how to trust God. Our most important one is trust God, but also trust ourselves and trust each other. And again, you can't trust each other if you don't trust yourself. So we'll be talking about that. He says true love cannot be without trust and respect for oneself and for the other person. He talks about watering the flowers in a friend. And so watering the flowers in the friend is where he had a talk that he gave, and this other person was sitting there that talk and clearly was miserable. And so Thich Nhat went to the person, his friend, afterwards and said, your friend's needs to be watered. Your friend's garden needs to be watered. And what he meant was that you need to go sit with your friend and tell your friend how much you love them, how much you appreciate them, how much, remind them of all of their good qualities, remind them of their strengths. So a lot of what we do as friends is encourage people to believe in themselves more and to look at the possibilities that they're not even where they're supposed to be yet, that there is infinite possibilities out there, that they're growing. And part of our job as a friend is to encourage them to be their best absolute selves. So we're going to talk about that. All right. So he says watering the flower in a friend is something that is very important to a relationship. You've got to nurture them and support them and encourage them. He says the roots of a lasting relationship are mindfulness, deep listening, and loving speech, and a strong community to support you. So I found that interesting, that if you think about it, when people get married, they have all of their friends and family there. And back in the day, the friends and the family were much more part of a community. The whole thought of it takes a village to raise a child. So all of the people in the community supported each other. So if you go to a friend and you're saying that you're having trouble in your relationship and they are a true friend, they're going to encourage you to grow the relationship and to look at what you can change in the relationship. They're not going to sit there and say, oh, you're right, he's a jerk. You need to just get rid of him. So part of having a good relationship is having a community of people that support you in your relationship, that try to remind you of why you got with that person in the first place, to try to remind you of how special that relationship is. Because relationships always go through ups and downs, and there's always times where you're mad at the other person. But he says it's so important to have a community of friends that all know you, that will support you and encourage you to keep that relationship going. So I thought that was very interesting. So to know how to love someone, you need to understand them, and to understand them, you need to listen, and you need to listen with patience. So again, what we're saying is, if you really value someone, part of your job is to be really patient in your listening, is to really try to understand where they're coming from. If you're having not even just a disagreement, but just a regular discussion with them, you don't want to kind of always be worried about what your next words are going to be and how you're going to respond. Your focus really needs to be on hearing them and on thinking, what is it that where are they coming from? What is it that they really are saying? What is really meaningful to them in this conversation? So there are books and books written about listening, but he talks about the fact that the quality of relationship is really going to be measured by how well you listen and how patient you are in your listening. Okay, so a true friend or partner is one who encourages you to look deep inside yourself for the beauty and the love that you've been seeking. So again, not looking outside of yourself, so you're not in a relationship for the other person to fix you or fill the hole inside of you. You're looking inside yourself, and the person who really loves you is saying, you've got all the answers already. You know what you need to know. I encourage you to be strong and to remember that you've got this, in other words. So a friend is not someone who says, I'll fix it for you and you're going to be dependent on me and you're going to need me. The friend is going to say, you've got this, you're strong enough. The whole job of a friend is to make someone feel like they can handle life and that they've got the answers and that you're there to support them. So I found that was really important. He also says, as long as we are rejecting ourselves and causing harm to our bodies and minds, there's no point in even talking about loving and accepting someone else. So that's the whole principle, that you've got to be taking care of yourself. You've got to be nurturing yourself. We're talking physically, emotionally, you're feeding yourself, you're making sure you're getting enough sleep, that you're getting enough exercise. He says, unless you're nurturing and loving yourself to the best of your ability, there's no point in even talking about having a healthy relationship. I thought that was really interesting. And he says, true love includes a sense of responsibility and accepting the other person as they are with all of their strengths and their weaknesses. Bring your patience, understanding, and energy to help them transform into the best people that they can possibly be. So again, it's not about changing the other person. It's not about saying this part of you isn't good enough. I want you to be different. It's about saying there is inside of you the potential to be fabulous, and I'm going to nurture that and help you grow into being the person that you want to be. So he says presence is the first act of love. Stop running and beginning to live in the present moment. And as you know, Buddhist people are really strong into meditation and sitting in the silence. If you love and really care for someone, you have to be there for them. And he says the person you love needs to be able to feel your true presence. My definition of mindfulness, he says, is to be there, to practice your true presence. Mindfulness allows offering the person you love, I am really here for you. And so I was having a discussion with someone yesterday, and they were going through a really, really bad time, and they were saying, oh, I know you're so busy, and you only have 10 minutes of free time. And I said, no, you're really important to me. I want to be here for you. And so bringing our presence is often the best gift that we can have. So there's another book, again, by another priest. This one is called The Way to Love, and it's by Anthony de Mello. And so Anthony de Mello is an Indian Jesuit priest, and he is also a psychotherapist, and he tours around the world, and he wrote a book called The Way to Love. And so he does his description of love by telling stories. And so he says, what is love? Take a look at a rose. Is it possible for the rose to say, I shall offer my fragrances to good people and withhold it from bad people? Or can you imagine a lamp that withholds its rays from a wicked person who seeks to walk in its light? It could only do that if it ceased being a lamp. I think that's a fabulous way of looking at it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So he talks about the qualities of love as well, and he says that the first quality of love is indiscriminate. We are exhorted to be like God, who makes his sun to shine and good on bad at the same time. The second quality of love is gratuitousness. And Thich Nhat talked about that too, but he has a slightly different definition. He says it gives and asks for nothing in return. That's something that we need to all work on, because, you know, we tend to have as human nature that we're giving, we expect something back. But gratuitousness means that you give without any thought of getting back. So he says, open your eyes and see the truth. Do you love people who bring emotional gratification and avoid those who don't? Do you love those who give what you want and live up to your expectations? Are you negative or indifferent to those who don't? So it's really asking you to look inside yourself and say, do you just surround with people that applaud you and say how great you are and give you, you know, all the good stuff? Or are you able to be with people that don't give you anything? And it's not about giving to get something back. It's about loving just for the sake of love. So the third quality is unself-consciousness. He said, love so enjoys the loving that it blissfully unaware of itself. I thought that was a wonderful quote. He says the smell of a rose or the light of a lamp is not turned on as someone walks by and turned off when nobody's there. It is on all the time. It just is. Love simply is. So the final quality of love is freedom. He says whenever there is a moment of coercion or intimidation or control, it just nullifies any of the love that you've been trying to have. So there can't be any coercion, there can't be any force, there can't be any power struggles, because that will totally eliminate any possibility of having true love. So he says, love is like listening to a symphony. To love it means to be sensible to all of the parts of the symphony. So he's gives this whole story about how when you listen to a symphony, you listen to all the different instruments. You don't just listen to the violin, or you don't just listen to the trumpet. And his point is, when you love, you want to love with a broader awareness of all that is around you. You don't just love one person and everybody else in the world doesn't matter to you. Obviously we're striving for this, we're not ever going to get there, but we're talking about being able to love in a bigger way. So the love God love people is loving in a bigger way than just loving a few individuals that are in front of us. Sensitive heart to everyone and everything. And he says love is not a relationship, love is a state of being. So I thought that was very cool too. Those are just some real good quotes. So he says when the heart is unobstructed, the result is love. Both teachers emphasize the need to work on ourselves, to be better at love, to practice mindfulness and being present, and the ability to release the need for distraction. So again, you can't be running around all the time. You need to be focusing and present to yourself and present to the other person. Both address loving without the need to get something and the unconditional need for love, and not being dependent on them to fill what's lacking in you. And so you need to remember that you are whole and complete the way that you are. You don't bring somebody in your life to fix the holes. You bring someone in your life to share the best of who you are. So I'm going to be talking about two people now that had near-death experiences, just because I'm going to be talking about God's love. And these people are swearing. There were like 29 different ones I listened to, but I picked out two that when they died, they were in the presence of God, and it was just this phenomenal experience. And if you listen to any people that talk about near-death experiences, the unconditional love is what you hear over and over again. So I've talked to you before about Anita Moorjani. Anita Moorjani is someone that Wayne Dyer was very much attached to. He started her in her career, and he brought her out, and he got her with Hay House. So she is someone who had cancer and was very, very sick for a long time. And for 5 years, she was like deathly ill, very, very, very ill. And then she died. And when she went to the hospital in Hong Kong, she had been sick for 5 years. And her organs had shut down, and all of the doctors say, bring all her family in, because this is it. This is the last time she's gone. These are her last hours. She was 86 pounds at that point, and she went into a coma, and she was in the coma for 30 hours. And so she came back, obviously, and her vision when she came back was to teach the lessons that she learned while she was in this coma. And so she says, I was aware of everything. I was being pulled away. My consciousness was expanding. And that's a term that was in every single near-death experience that I've listened to. They all said my consciousness was expanding. I felt what everybody else was feeling. She said she could feel what her brother was thinking. She could feel what the doctors were thinking. She could feel what her husband was thinking. She could feel all of that. She said that she felt this unconditional love. She was surrounded and embraced by this unconditional love. She said she didn't have to do anything to prove herself or to be anything. It was just this unbelievable love. She said there was no judgment whatsoever, only compassion. She said she felt that she had to come back because she hadn't finished her work on this earth yet, and that she was coming back to teach this lesson And she had come back. Her purpose was to teach everybody to live fearlessly and not to be afraid to be myself. She said that's all I had to do was to teach everybody not to be afraid to be yourself. It's more important than being positive. So Wayne Dyer asked her, well, so does that mean you just be positive all the time? She said, no, it's not about being positive. It's about being authentic. It's about being your real and true self. And that's all she had to do. She said, more important than being authentic, positive is being authentic. I learned that's the most important thing is to be yourself. She said, what I can only describe as superb and glorious unconditional love surrounded me, wrapping me tight as I continued to let go. The term unconditional love really doesn't even do justice to the feeling I was having. Love, joy, ecstasy, and awe poured into me, through me, and engulfed me. I was swallowed up and enveloped by more love than I could ever know existed. So that was just incredible to me. There's one other person I want to talk about named Steve Gardipee, and he had a near-death experience as well. And he goes around the country talking about it. He is a Vietnam vet who was shot down in 1970 in his helicopter. And so it was his mission to find out where the enemy was, and he found out where they were, and he was shot down. And so he was lying in the ground, and he was very, very badly wounded, and he was bleeding out of everywhere. And his gunner is the one who dragged him through the forest to try to get to safety. And he says, there was no pain. He said, I was shocked because everybody thinks when you're dying, there's going to be pain. He said, there was no pain. He said, it actually felt really good. He said, my vision blurred. It first started to have blurred vision, and then it was gray, and then it went totally 100% black. And he said, I was helpless. I couldn't move at all, and I was bleeding out of everywhere. But he started to say, what's happening to me? And he realized he was dying. But he said he stopped being afraid. And he said to God, all right, thy will be done. If this is what is happening, this is what is happening. And he saw this bright light. He said, the brightest light you can imagine is a dark hole compared to the light that I was seeing. And that's in all of the near-death experiences, they talk about the light. So he says, it wasn't that God is the light, God is love. He said, you could feel the presence of that. He is literally made up of love. I started feeling that love all around me. He said, you know how you're out and you know the air is all around you, but you can't really feel it, but you know it's there? He said, it's more like being in a bathtub of hot water, and you can feel the warmth and you can feel the water around you. He said, I could feel God's presence. He also talks quite a bit about the fact that he could hear God's thoughts. And he said it wasn't like he heard a voice, but he could feel God's thoughts. He could feel the thoughts in his mind. He could feel it happening. So he said he started to feel that love that was surrounding you. He looked down, he said he saw his head on the ground next to the bush. So he was obviously outside of his body if he was seeing his head. And he was expanding the whole time. And a lot of the other near-death experiences talk about expanding too. He said he was feeling the presence of God, letting me know that he was surrounding me and protecting me. He made his thoughts known to me. He said, you will expand out into the cosmos and know all these things. You will be given a power. He said, it is immeasurably more powerful than I ever imagined God to be. He said, God and him were joined together and he was one. He could feel this immense power. It was more powerful than he ever imagined. He said he was given a vision that God was holding him in the palm of his hand. And like he said, it was like a parent. And he said that God was so proud to have him there. It's like a parent with a newborn baby. And he was saying he was so proud to have him there. And God said, even in this state, you can't comprehend what I am. I am more infinitely powerful and loving and caring than you could ever imagine. And so he went in and out of his body a couple times. He eventually came back and he said to God, I don't want to go back. You show me this incredible, it's a long talk, so I'm just synopsizing some of it, but he said, I don't want to go back. You show me this incredible life where I'm in touch with the cosmos. He said he was in the dirt and he could feel all of the atoms and cells in the dirt. He could feel the water coming down into the dirt. He could feel the blossoming and the leaves growing, that he was part of the cosmos. And he said he didn't want to go back, and God said, you're not ready yet. You have to go back. And so he came back. So he said God explained to him that he only had one need. God's only need is to love us. He said, the only reason I created mankind is because I wanted to love you. I wanted to love you. And you need to go back and you need to tell people that I'm not a vengeful God. I'm not a judgmental God. I'm not a blaming God. I'm here to love you. I want you to understand that you are so much more powerful than you could ever possibly imagine. So he went back through that tunnel, and he says, people say it's a tunnel of light. He said, it didn't feel to me like a tunnel of light. It felt like a tunnel of love. He said, I could just feel the love surrounding me all over the place. And he says that he went back to love people and teach people this lesson. And he said, the mind cannot in any way even begin to imagine the level of love, of unconditional love that God has for us. And so that's what he's talking about. So there's the God part. And in 1 John 4:8, it says, whoever does not love God does not know not God, because God is love. Romans 8:39 says, neither height nor depth nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus, our Lord. So we started with love God, love people. But as I studied and as I listened and as I read and as I wrote, I understand that it's actually a really big circle. And it's not just love God, love people. It is love God, love people, love ourselves. So God is inside us. It really is this big circle. Love God, love people, love ourselves. So all of the teachings that I've been talking about for the last however many weeks, so Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, Pema Chadron, Oprah, Abraham Hicks, Brene Brown, and this week's Thich Nhat Hanh and Anthony Mello, they all talk about the need to love ourselves and forgive ourselves, that there is no way that we can possibly love anyone else unless we do the work on ourselves. They all talk about the fact of sitting still. You know I harp on it a lot, but if you can't sit still and if you're constantly running, you're never going to make peace with the parts of yourselves that are hurting. You need to be able to sit still. Now, don't torture yourself about it, but you need to be able to sit still so you can start to heal that stuff that needs to be healed. So it's about sitting still with the parts of ourselves that we don't like until we have healed and let go of our self-inflicted judgments. There's no loving outside of ourselves until we first loving the inside of ourselves. That's my quote, and I think it kind of sums it up a little bit. So you can't give what you don't have, so you must fill up your own heart and love yourself first before it can flow freely to others. So I remind you, you are all beloved child of God, perfect, whole, and complete. Love yourself authentically. Nurture and cherish the person who houses the soul of God, so that you can joyfully, passionately, and wholeheartedly love God, love people. And so it is. Thank you. All righty, I'm going to unmute you guys. So here we go. Unmute. Anybody can talk who wants to. Hey. All right. Yeah. I think I've got everybody unmuted now, so anybody feel free. Love God, love people, but if you want to just check in and say how you are, that's all good too.
Thank you,